Before we begin to dissect the holy four-letter name Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei and discuss its relationship to the 10 Sephirot and the different Partzuphim that make up each and every world, I feel the duty to clarify and straighten out a very big mistake that many people have made and continue to make with regards to their understanding of the holy four-letter name Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei. What mistake am I referring to? In several books, we find that the holy name Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei is called Shem Ha'etzem of the Creator. What does that term mean, Shem Ha'etzem? The closest translation that we could offer for the term Shem Ha'etzem would probably be the name of his essence. And the confusion begins when people presume that since Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei is the name of God's essence, that this refers to the essence of the Ein Sof. In other words, people mistakenly understand that Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei is the Ein Sof. But you should know that this is actually a very great mistake. In fact, the holy Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who lived in the generation of the Arizal, warned us over and over that it is certainly forbidden to attribute any description whatsoever to the Ein Sof. And not only shapes and forms are we forbidden to attribute to the Ein Sof, but even holy names and letters. And in truth, when we stop to think about it, our straight thinking actually mandates that it is certainly unrealistic to believe that the infinite Ein Sof is a holy name made up of the four letters Yod, Kei, Vav, and Kei. Why not? Because after all, this holy name has a beginning in the letter Yod and an end in the second letter Hey. Not only that, but this name has exactly four letters. If so, then the Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei cannot possibly be the infinite Ein Sof, since the Ein Sof certainly has no beginning and no end, and no particular number that we can attribute to it, as we indeed clarified in great depth earlier on when we learned that the Ein Sof is Pashut. So why then have so many of us become accustomed to thinking of the holy four-letter name Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei as the Creator? Furthermore, what did all those holy books mean when they taught us that Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei is the name of his essence? In order to appreciate why the holy books refer to the Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei as the name of his essence, we need to differentiate between Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei and the rest of the holy names. You should know that all the other holy names relate to only one specific Sephirah. For example, the holy name El relates specifically to the Sephirah called Chesed, while the holy name Elohim relates specifically to the Sephirah called Gevurah, and the holy name Shaddai relates specifically to the Sephirah called Yesod. On the other hand, the holy four-letter name Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei is very different in that respect, as Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei actually relates to all the Sephirot and to all of the Partzuphim. If so, then we can go as far as to say that Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei is the root of all the holy names. Inasmuch, this is why Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei is often referred to as the name of his essence. And as we are about to learn and illustrate, Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei is also the root of all the Sephirot, as well as the root of all the Partzuphim. But even with all that said, Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei is certainly not representative of the Ein Sof himself, at least not in his infinite state as the Creator that exists, completely independent and outside of everything that he created inside the Halal following the Tzimtzum. After all, nothing about the Ein Sof's infinite Pashut existence can be associated with any letters or any numbers. However, what the holy four-letter name Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei does represent is the state only after the Tzimtzum and the following creation of all the worlds and all the Sephirot and all the Partzuphim inside the Halal. But to be even more precise, we should probably define the holy four-lettered name Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei as the light of Rachamim that the Ein Sof, so to speak, injects back into the Halal via the Kav and spreads into all the worlds and all the Sephirot and all the Partzuphim that the Creator formed inside the Halal by the Kav. In other words, Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei represents the Ein Sof inside every single one of His creations. Inasmuch, this is why it is called the name of His essence, since after all, the essence of the entire creation is the Creator Himself, as without the Creator, there certainly is no creation. And don't forget this crucial clarification, as without it, everything we're about to learn will certainly be completely distorted. Rather, at every single step of the way, remember that the holy four-letter name Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei represents how the Creator imbues and hides inside of the 10 Sephirot and all of His other creations, but not to say that the Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei is the Ein Sof Himself in His purest Pashut form. And based on the great rule that we defined, the Kabbalists have divided Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei into its 4 individual letters. As you can see in the illustration before you, how the letter Yod stands on a higher level than the first letter Hey, and how the first letter Hey stands at a higher level than the letter Vav, and how the letter Vav stands at a higher level than the second letter Hey. But if you pay even closer attention, you'll notice that there is actually a 5th part that makes up the holy name Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei. In fact, this extra aspect actually stands at a higher level than the other 4, even higher than the letter Yod. What is this 5th aspect? This is the Kotz of the Yod, i.e., the upper tip of the Yod. And although when we look at the Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei written on paper, it is obvious that the upper Kotz of the Yod is indeed connected to the main body of the letter Yod, nevertheless, the Kabbalists point out that the Kotz of the Yod actually represents another spiritual level in and of itself. And as we're about to learn and illustrate, this additional spiritual level is actually the root not only of the letter Yod, but of the entire Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei as well. If so, it comes out that there are actually 5 different levels in the holy name Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei. The upper Kotz of the letter Yod, the letter Yod itself, the first letter Hey, the letter Vav, and the second letter Hey. And I won't be surprised if the illustration that you currently see may strike you as overly confusing due to all the different details and comparisons that it contains. Not only of the different levels of the Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei, but of the 10 Sephirot and 12 Partzuphim that make up each world as well. Therefore, in order to simplify things for you, we'll begin by focusing only on the intimate relationship between the different levels of the Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei and the 10 general Sephirot that make up each and every world. And as you can clearly see now, the upper Kotz of the letter Yod represents the Sephirah called Keter. And when we contemplate upon the concept of Keter, which literally means crown, we immediately understand that the natural position of the Keter is necessarily on top of something else, much the way the crown of a king is necessarily on top of his head, as the crown certainly isn't part of the king's body. And that's also the case in the spiritual realm, as the Kotz of the Yod sits on top of the main body of the letter Yod, since it is indeed a separate individual level in and of itself, and not actually part of the letter Yod itself. The letter Yod itself represents the Sephirah called Chokhmah. And you should know that in truth, Just as the letter Yod is the first letter in the holy name Yod Kei Vav Kei, so too, in many respects, Chokhmah is also considered to be the first Sephirah. And although we usually enumerate the 10 Sephirot beginning from Keter, nevertheless, sometimes Keter is intentionally overlooked, in which case we find Chokhmah listed as the first of the 10 Sephirot. In fact, David HaMelech alluded to this secret in a verse in Tehillim when he said, Reshit Chokhmah, which could roughly be translated as Chokhmah comes first. Hence, Chokhmah is sometimes looked at as the first Sephirah, at least in some respects. However, with all that said, Keter is in fact the first Sephirah. We continue with the first letter Hey of the four-lettered name Yod Kei Vav Kei. This letter represents the Sephirah called Binah. However, the letter Vav of the Yod Kei Vav Kei represents no less than 6 different Sephirot, which are Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. And in case this group of 6 Sephirot sounds familiar to you, we did already mention them as the 6 Ketzavot of Ze'er Anpin. However, for the purpose of our current discussion, we need to take to heart that these 6 Sephirot are also represented by the letter Vav of the four-letter name Yod Kei Vav Kei. And if you'll ask me how the letter Vav actually hints to the fact that it represents no less than 6 Sephirot, I'll point out to you that the Gematria, which is the numerological value of the letter Vav, is after all 6, inasmuch it naturally represents 6 Sephirot. The remaining part of the holy name Yod Kei Vav Kei is of course the second letter Hey. And since the second letter Hey is the last part of the Yod Kei Vav Kei, it naturally represents the last of the 10 Sephirot, which is the Sephirah called Malchut. And now that we've learned how the 5 parts that make up the Yod Kei Vav Kei represent the 10 Sephirot, we'll go up another level and add to our picture the 12 Partzuphim which make up each and every world. After all, if you remember, our main objective was to clarify the relationship between the different Partzuphim and the holy name Yod Kei Vav Kei. And here too we'll begin with the highest part of the Yod Kei Vav Kei, which of course is the upper quotes of the letter Yod. And as you can see, the quotes of the Yod represents the Partzuphim Atik Dechura and Nukvei de Atik, who make up the male and female sides of the general Partzuf called Atik Yumin, as well as the Partzufim Arich Dechura and Nukvei de Arich, who make up the male and female sides of the general Partzuf called Arich Anpin. The letter Yod itself represents Partzuf Abba and Partzuf Ima. And as you can see in the illustration before you, these 2 private Partzufim make up the male and the female sides of the general Partzuf called Abba Ve'ima Ilain, which we already spoke about earlier on in our learning. The first letter Hey of the Yod Kei Vav Kei represents Partzuf Yisrael Saba and Partzuf Tevuna. And as we also learned before, these 2 private Partzufim make up the male and the female sides of the general Partzuf called Yisrael Saba Utvuna. Meanwhile, the letter Vav of the Yod Kei Vav Kei represents Partzuf Ze'er Anpin and Partzuf Le'ah. And as we also learned earlier on, these 2 private Partzufim combine to make up the general Partzuf called Ze'er Anpin Venukvei. The last part of the holy name Yod Kei Vav Kei is the second letter Hey. This letter represents Partzuf Yaakov and Partzuf Rachel, who also combine to make up the general Partzuf, which is appropriately called Yaakov Verachel. These are the 12 Partzufim that make up each and every world. and their individual representation in the holy four-lettered name Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei. And now, towards the end of our current session, we'll go back and reiterate the most relevant point to our discussion. After all, we started off by asking why the above-mentioned change in order took place specifically in the general Partzufim, Atik, Yomin, and Arich Anpin. We began to answer that question by pointing out that Atik, Yomin, and Arich Anpin are actually just one general Sephirah in any world, namely the Sephirah called Keter. Inasmuch the Creator treated these Partzufim as one unit, or one Partzuf if you will. Therefore, all the circular Igulim aspects of these Partzufim were formed first, and only then did their linear Yosher aspects begin to be formed as well. And in the last few minutes, we continued to clarify that the reason why Atik, Yomin, and Arich Anpin combine together to make up one unified spiritual unit called Keter is because they actually share a common root in the four-letter name Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei, which, as we just learned, is the upper chords of the letter Yod. And since they are obviously enrooted together in the Yod-Kei-Vav-Kei, the Creator therefore treated them as one unit when it came time to form their circular Igulim and linear Yosher aspects, as we illustrated earlier. And please God, in our future learning, we'll eventually clarify why the Sephirah called Keter has two different parts, one called Atik Yomin and another one called Arich Anpin, but one thing at a time.